Welcome into Rounding the Bases, the podcast about culture and leadership with a baseball twist. My name is Joel Goldberg. Actually, we'll slide over into the world of football today and much more. Actually, not my first time jumping into football lately. Was it somewhat recently that we had Monte Ball on, former NFL player, running back, and former Wisconsin Badger, one of the great college running backs of all time, who didn't last long in the league because of his bout with alcoholism, and he has changed his life and really making a difference. So I'll direct everybody to that one. Again, if you have interest, it's a new book out. But my guest today is making an impact in the NFL and well beyond the National Football League. She recently guest wrote a column, which I thought was amazing. Anybody that's ever paid attention to the NFL knows that Peter King's Monday morning quarterback column is legendary. And Sam Rapoport guest wrote a column in that. I want to read a little bit of it as an intro and then tell you who she is. She wrote, my first draft of this column was trash. Subconsciously, I wrote an entire 1,500-word essay as the person I thought you would all want me to be. It fit the mold. It was corporate, and it was boring. You see, I grew up reading the Monday Morning Quarterback. I submitted questions to the column when I was in high school, hoping Peter King would one day answer it. She went on to say that I've known I was gay unequivocally since I was 5 years old. I looked at my parents. I wanted to be my father. I felt like a boy, and at times I thought I was one. I spent my youth trying to figure out how to end my life so no one would find out I was a mistake. Even now, that word is hard to type. I'll let you read the rest of it. We'll put the link to the column and so much more about Sam Rapoport in the show links. But Sam Rapoport has, I believe, emerged as a star in the NFL. She has worked for the NFL for nearly 20 years, and now diversity and inclusion. She also happens to be my cousin. And so I've followed along from a distance, and I remember a young Sam Rapoport. I'm old enough to do that. And now she is just doing amazing things. And so for the first time ever, I bring in a relative, I believe, to Rounding the Bases, Sam Rapoport, from her home in the New York area in New Jersey. Sam, how are you?
Good, Joel. Thank you so much for having me.
That column was absolutely amazing. It had to do with Carl Nassib, who recently came out, and we'll talk about that. But I also think it was, and we'll get into what you do with the NFL and maybe a little bit of childhood too, because I do remember some of that, even though I'm a bit older than you. But that had to have been a very, I don't know if it was scary or not, but a brave thing. I mean, you've told your story enough, but now you're on the ultimate platform, right? I mean, I don't know if the nerves were just in getting it right, because that's something you've read for so long that is mandatory reading on a Monday morning. But what was it like to write that column?
Yeah, it was out of body while it was happening. I actually physically was shaking as I was writing it, and my hands went numb a little. But I was committed to being authentic, and in my career, I'm committed to being authentic right now. And so I didn't want to be an imposter when I was writing it. I didn't want to write something that would have been great, but it would have been published. And when you were just quoting me, I would have cringed, instead, as you were quoting me, I was kind of proud that I had the guts to do that, because the result of it is, I've been contacted by several people in the sports industry who are not out yet, who have asked my help in coming out in sports. And so, it's an outcome I didn't anticipate, but something that I feel proud about.
You should. And I was reading it, and let me preface everything. It's not like Sam and I grew up, around each other every single day. You were up in Canada. I was down in New Jersey, and then later Chicago. But our paths would cross on family trips, or I don't know what you remember. I mean, I remember walking around at my grandparents' house in Florida with my brother and you and your sister, and I think we were all visiting our grandparents down in Florida. That for family tree's sake, Sam's grandfather was my grandmother's younger brother. And so our parents, my mom and Sam's late father, grew up together, or at least saw each other more than we did as first cousins. So I remember a young kid that loved sports. I'm guessing you were very inquisitive about that, because that's all my brother and I ever talked about. But I wouldn't know, remember, or thought about, she's gay or not or anything like that. But this is something, as you talk about in the column, that you knew early on. You also knew that you had this unbelievable love for football, which I have no idea how a kid growing up in Canada with a lot of family members that love hockey, right?
Yeah.
How did you end up down this path?
Yeah, to your first point though, Joel, you were kind of like cool American cousin Joel, where I probably only met you a couple times, but I remember pictures with you, and your hair was a different color back then.
Yeah, it was. Yes, it was.
And I remember those pictures of us hanging out on some vacations together. But and now I forget your question, Joel. What was the second part?
No, so well, really, just like how in the world did you get into football? I mean, it's not like you're the only Canadian that loves football, but I almost feel like it's the same thing with baseball with me. It's like baseball's not new up in Canada. I mean, you have the Blue Jays. I remember going up to Montreal as a kid to visit family and going to Expos games, but it's all about hockey up there.
Yeah.
And you come out having to love the NFL and then working it as much as anybody. What sets you down that path?
So I played every sport growing up. I didn't play ice hockey, but I played floor hockey growing up, and I ran track, played soccer. But the second a football was put in my hand and I was taught how to throw, I just fell in love with it. And my father called it like my father believed that he passed on the football gene to me because he was a football player. And so it's kind of inexplicable, but I just started playing. I felt very good at it. Growing up, something to boost my confidence, something where I felt like I was excelling. And then from the participatory standpoint, the next step was then, watching the game and becoming an avid fan. And so I started watching the NFL and the CFL, and I was, my fandom was growing, and to the point where I was obsessed. And, every high school essay I wrote was about football. My yearbook, everyone wrote about how I played football. And really, that's what started to grow my love for the sport.
You guys were up in Ottawa, weren't you?
We were, yeah.
That's what I thought. That's what I remembered. I mean, it was always like, being the American cousins. It was like I was more out of touch than, say, my mom was, who I think once a month they would drive up when she was a kid from New Jersey up to, to see all the cousins and all that type of thing. But you pretty early on jumped in with the NFL. Tell me about the start of that experience and then what it's been like to grow with the NFL, to have been there for so long, and really now to have a position of major influence. Right.
So I started in 2003. I didn't know how to get into the NFL. I knew that I wanted to be here, and I knew that's all I wanted to do. And so I sent a football with my resume for a 2003 internship, and I was lucky enough to get it. It's a gimmicky application, but I guess it resonated with someone. And so I got my first internship in marketing in 2003, and I've worked, at the NFL for the majority of that. I've also worked for USA Football, and I've seen the league evolve tremendously from when I started. When I started, Commissioner Tagliabue was in charge. So I was lucky to be involved or be at the NFL during the transition from Commissioner Tagliabue to Commissioner Goodell. And I've seen us evolve. I've seen us get better. In the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, I've seen us, progress leaps and bounds, right? From where we were, 20 years ago to now, it really is night and day.
Yeah. I mean, I covered the NFL for a lot of years, and I think still like a lot of sports, there's that, that, I don't know, old school is not the right word. The locker room can be a pretty nasty place. Yeah. And oftentimes without even realizing it too. I mean, not that that's an excuse, but I've seen that start to get better. I haven't been in an NFL locker room for a lot of years, spent a lot of time in NHL locker rooms, obviously spend every day now in baseball clubhouses, not technically because we're not allowed in them, but I'm around those guys still every day, pandemic and all of that. How much have we changed in the last 20 years?
It's mirrored society and our country because the country is evolving, right? So 20 years ago, there were maybe one or two out celebrities. There were no out athletes, right? People weren't saying the words LGBTQ+. And if they were, it was guaranteed to be pejorative or derogatory. Mm-hmm. And so, we've evolved with the country, but that also comes with leadership that demands it. And, in our office, we have, Commissioner Goodell's brother is gay. And our leadership is now better reflecting, society and our fans. But to your point, there's a lot of work to do in the locker rooms, at club facilities, and our clubs know that. And, we're not where we all know we can be. But, a next evolution of that, I work a lot with females in football, is for us all to get over that women in the locker room thing and let people do their damn jobs. And if you don't trust anyone, regardless of their gender, they shouldn't be working for you. And if you trust them, you should trust them to be where they need to be to do their job. And so we have a long way to go in that space, but we're taking steps, and we're making strides. And that's what's important, is to continue to chip away at it.
I think that's it, chipping away. I mean, I've seen my colleagues, my female colleagues, in locker rooms and clubhouses for years, and it has become less awkward. I was always uncomfortable and yet amazed at how so many women that I knew that I was friends with, that still am friends with, that could put up with the crap and just keep doing their job. And I see less and less of that. It's still not where it needs to be. I remember my early years of covering NFL. I mean, 23-year-old reporter or something in the locker room in Green Bay, covering Brett Favre and all of those guys. And at that point, I'm dating my now wife. And so she would come with me because, I was in a small market in Wisconsin, and I'm the cameraman and the reporter and all the things that you have to do when you're breaking into the business. So she'd come and, hold the microphone for me, or I guess that was a date for us. I don't know. And it was awkward in there. Like that. Not that she was the only woman, but it was an uncomfortable place. And I think it's gotten better. I'm curious, over the years that you've been with the NFL, how much easier it has been to connect with the highest levels of leadership on topics of diversity and inclusion. Has it been easier to be able to get an audience and to be able to get that back and forth dialogue?
If I'm being honest, it's easier because leadership are younger and younger. And so the younger our leaders are, the more progressive they are, because they grew up in a society where they've met people from all different types of backgrounds, right? If you look at a Coach Sean McVay, or, Coach Sean McDermott, or even Ron Rivera, and, they grew up in generations where it was a lot more normal. And so it's not hard with the young men, and I say men because there are no women in those positions yet. But our head coaches and GMs, it's not difficult with the ones that get it, because they want to see the progress as much as anyone.
One of the reasons I wanted to have you on with this is that I so many of the guests that I have on the show, and it really is all about culture and leadership. I've had a lot of guests on to discuss diversity and inclusion, and that, to me, that doesn't matter whether that's in the NFL, whether that's any corporation. I think it all does mirror each other and society, as you talked about a little bit before. And while we are chipping away, there's still so much further to go. But then I start seeing some of the women that I've had on my podcast that are in roles that they would have never been in before. But then you sit there and say, well, there should be more. There should be a lot more. We're so late to the party on this one. It's the same in the NFL. So it's still a big story when Carl Nassib comes out. It's still a big story when a female referee or a coach is hired, and on and on and on. So how do you see that? Do you see it as progress? Do you see it as we're so far behind? A combination of both?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a sign of progress. The first step is the first, but we very quickly want to get to the second. And that really is where we focus a great deal of our attention, because it's not helpful to the person, for any person, right? The first Black female scout, right? The first Black female official, the first female as a vice president. It doesn't help them. It hurts them. It puts extra rocks in their backpack, an extra spotlight on them that they didn't ask for, right? They're just trying to do their jobs. And so when you go from 1 to 2, it's beneficial to that group of people. And then you need to go from 2 to ubiquity. And our ultimate goal is that normalization and ubiquity of difference in football. So it's not just women. It's that our league needs to reflect our fan base and our country and our planet. And really, that's what we're going for. That's our ultimate goal. And we have enough leaders committed to it that I really believe in our lifetime, we will get a lot more close to that place.
And what you're doing, not just you, all of the NFL, but you obviously are in that position to lead and bring everybody with you. It is, and I'm not trying to minimize what anyone in the same role that you have at a big corporation, but it's the NFL. I mean, this is an entity and an organization. I don't care if you're a football fan or not. Everybody knows what the NFL is. And oh, by the way, yes, everybody's watching. The numbers would suggest that too. Certainly the case here in Kansas City, as you know, with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, and the world revolves around that. But what a huge platform that you personally have too. How often do you think about that, the NFL name and the impact that you're able to have on society, not just football?
Yeah, I think it's the biggest privilege of working at the NFL is the platform we have to do good. And so I never take that lightly. And when new employees come in, that's the first thing I usually mention to them is don't take for granted the platform that you're afforded and the messages that we can send to change society for the better. And, we see that in the work we're doing with gender diversity, for an example, where it's not just we have more female coaches and scouts in the NFL. What we're seeing now is young girls and women are believing that this is an option for them. So we're seeing more girls and women in peewee and high school football coaching, certainly in college and in other sports and other industries as well. So we don't take it lightly that it certainly trickles down to other sports, to other industries, to other levels of the sport. And that to me is the biggest privilege of working at the NFL. And I've in 20 years, I've never taken that for granted. It truly is fantastic. It also makes our jobs a little bit easier. We have a huge platform and more than half the country are fans of the game. So.
Yeah, no, you have a riveted audience, not just on Sundays. As we all know, the NFL has become a 365-day-a-year type of thing. I could turn on whatever network, ESPN, whoever it is, and if we're 2 months from the draft, they're talking about the draft and then on and on and on, training camp. And so, yes, the platform is huge. I want to, just getting back to the column that you wrote, it was, I think, riveting for me to just read it. Obviously, again, I wouldn't have known what you were going through or having to hide at times or question yourself, finding your place as a kid. But that process you wrote, there's a beautiful paragraph in there about, and I could feel the emotions, like my heart was pounding with it, where you finally decide, I'm going to this NFL event and I'm going to go with another woman and I'm not going to hide who I am anymore. And you just happen to, the first person that kind of sees you as you're nervous happens to be someone that I guess you might as well start at the top, right? I mean, that was that. And I'm guessing that's still a moment you could feel the emotions to this day.
Absolutely. I mean, my heart started pounding even when you just said that, because I remember what I was feeling in the moment. I remember seeing him look at me and I remember thinking, this is it. It's a lifetime of hiding something. And there was no place more difficult for anyone really I shouldn't say that, for me in work to come out. And so I knew that Commissioner Goodell was very aware, very involved in the LGBTQ plus community. That certainly made things easier for me. But yeah, my heart was pounding, hands were sweating, everything, my world was about to explode in my head. But, something that is, somewhat typical, it certainly doesn't happen all the time though, is that for people who come out is you anticipate the monster is a lot bigger than it actually is. And so you kind of like, oh my God, when this happens, everything's going to change. Everyone's going to look at me differently. Everyone's going to ask me inappropriate things. People are going to think things. But the truth is I was welcomed with nothing but kind of high fives and big smiles and hugs. And even to this day, people still find me interesting. And, it's actually not a liability anymore, but it's actually a huge asset because I'm different in a good way. And, it's something that I've really turned into, and many people in the community turn into an asset in the office now.
But if that is the moment that as you were writing about, and you sort of wrote it in a way that, look, anybody that has been in these shoes before knows exactly what that moment is, right? I haven't lived that moment, but I felt like I was in that moment with you, with the way that you so eloquently described it. And then the first person you see is Roger Goodell. I mean, did that make you more nervous or less nervous? I mean, the fact that he has a gay brother had to have helped, but that's the most famous person in the NFL right there.
Yeah. And, and like I mentioned in the article, I was fortunate to develop a relationship with Commissioner Goodell before he became commissioner. So I considered him a friend. And, as he was walking over, I had in my head like, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to throw caution to the wind. And I didn't have a choice, honestly, but it was kind of apropos, for the commissioner to be the first. And then I kind of worked my way down the organization, I guess. But it was exhilarating, and it was incredibly nerve-wracking at the same time.
So when Carl Nassib comes out, was that news a surprise to you? I mean, it obviously suddenly popped up and filled every ticker. I don't know because I know in the article you wrote that you didn't know him personally.
Yep.
I'm sure you guys will meet if you haven't yet, because there's so much he can do if he wants to do it. He's already done so much. But what was your reaction when you saw that news?
I didn't know. And I froze for a while, and I was trying to, we've been prepared for it. We've discussed this obviously internally for a long time. We knew someone was going to come out, and, I'm so thrilled in the way he did. And, what he asked was like respect from the media, because I think other players who came out, whether it's after or during, struggled with the amount of media attention they got. Mm-hmm. But the impact that it's going to have, and what I was thinking about when I first saw, the news come across Twitter, was all of the little gay athletes out there, male, female, non-binary, every gender, looking at this and saying, okay, it's a little more okay. It's a little more okay. And, Carl is a hero for doing that. And I truly also believe that he's going to catalyze a movement where other players are now going to feel more comfortable, because I don't know Carl's experience after he came out, but what I would guess is the monster was a lot smaller than he thought it would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, and I want to be careful not to minimize any of the athletes that came out before him, because they didn't do anything that was any less courageous or important than what he did. However, he happens to be the one, and now you talked before about firsts. We got to get past firsts. And so, and we will, right? But he will always be that first, just like Jackie Robinson was the first in baseball, and on and on and on. And he happens to be active. So right. I don't want to minimize those that came before, but they're not also as much in the spotlight anymore.
Right.
Carl Nassib is going to suit up, and he's going to be leveling quarterbacks on Sundays, and he's going to be on people's TV screens. And so, and he knew that going in. I mean, he knew that this now put him in the spotlight, and he'll handle it the way he is going to handle it. But how significant is that to have an active player?
It's significant because now fans are going to be in the stands with signs that say, Carl Nassib, you're a hero. And people are actually going to see him in action. And like you mentioned, I don't want to minimize certainly the former players, and especially Michael Sam, who came out, before the draft, which took a lot of courage, and something where, it was a big risk for him. So certainly he was a hero in that as well. But I feel as though now, Carl Nassib's jersey was the #1 selling jersey the week he came out. If that doesn't speak to the volumes of support that exist in this country for, athletes who are not yet out, that is a message that I'd personally love to send, is that buying a jersey means I want to wear you on my chest wherever you go. And that's meaningful. That's certain, and other gay football players at lower ranks have come out since that as well. So it really demonstrates if you can't be what you can't see. And Carl is really changing that for many people, for many young athletes and many young kids in the country.
Yeah, and that's right. I mean, not just football players, but athletes or non-athletes for that matter, too, with the attention. We saw so much of the Michael Sam story here where I'm at, maybe even beyond what the national exposure was, because we're in that media market. We're 2 hours from the University of Missouri, where Michael played his football. All right, I've got my baseball themed questions, and I love it. Anytime I have a guest on that just does not pay attention to baseball, I say, I promise you, I will not ask you any baseball questions. So my cousin Sam Rapoport is football through and through. And so I'm not going to ask her about the state of the New York Yankees, which based on what I see in the headlines is never very good, but that's the New York tabloids. But we'll talk about you and your journey. What is the biggest home run that you have hit in your career?
I think the biggest home run I've hit in my career was, with many other people, was creating the NFL Women's Careers in Football Forum. And that started 5 years ago. And the idea from that program was, me, Troy Vincent, Commissioner Goodell, we looked around and we didn't see any women in these traditionally male held positions in the NFL, like coaching and scouting. And together we all decided that absolutely needed to be changed, and we needed to build a bridge between those ready female candidates and these positions somehow. So in 2017, with the help of many people, I created that program and we launched it, and we just put incredibly qualified, amazing women in a room with our owners, head coaches, and GMs for 2 days. And since that program started 5 years ago, 140 women have secured positions in football, in college and professional football through that program. And so I'm proud of that, because it's a big part of what the NFL is trying to do to further diversify and further represent our fan base. I think that's the biggest home run I've hit so far.
It's huge. And I remember, reading about that and hearing about it when it happened, and it was, it was groundbreaking. And now, just like everything else with firsts, it seems to me like it's just becoming more normal. It's more normal to see more women in the NFL. And so that was a huge home run. And I was hoping you'd mention Troy Vincent. My freshman year at Wisconsin, he was the star player there. And this was the first and probably last year that they were really awful, because they'd had a new coach, Barry Alvarez, and Troy Vincent was the best player on the team. And we used to go to games as freshmen, not to watch the results or anything, because they were terrible. I mean, they got blown out every single game. The only thing you hope for was that Troy Vincent might do something. He also returned punts, I believe, and he returned some punts for touchdowns. That's all we had to hope for. Right. Obviously, he went on to a great NFL career. He went on to a great career working for the NFL. And but that was, we're talking many, many years ago. And so I always have fond memories of Troy Vincent. Okay, second question, the swing and the miss. What's the biggest swing and miss that you've taken in your career, and what did you learn from it?
So there are a lot, but I think, going back to the article I wrote, it certainly isn't a regret that I have. It's more so looking back on lost years of opportunities to connect with people where I chose not to. So, for the first 10 years of my career, I don't think I had many friends in the office. I didn't do anything social. I avoided everything. And, looking back on my career, I don't regret when I came out, because every person has a moment when it's right. And that was my moment when I came out in 2013. But looking back on it, I realized, how many connections I missed out on just from people that I could have developed friendships with that I didn't. But that's a part of my story. It's a part of my journey. And, I don't regret it. I just look to continue to improve that as I develop in my career.
But that, again, is the monster being bigger than you thought, right?
That's exactly it. Yep.
And all of those years, I'm just guessing that life on the other side, 2013 and on, where you suddenly wrote about this in the article, get to dress like yourself, be like yourself, has to have been the most freeing thing. And then to see how much people embraced you for the real Sam Rapoport had to have been just the ultimate validation.
It's incredible validation, but and I mentioned a quote in that article. One of the tricky parts of it is that I'm still doing this, is you have to spend a lot of time undoing the damage that you did by being someone else. So, I still catch myself trying to avoid social situations, and I have to check myself saying it's okay, because my survival mode, and I was still a kid, I was 22. My brain wasn't even fully developed yet. So my survival mode was avoidance. And so I defer to avoidance all the time now, and I have to check myself with that. And sometimes when I'm doing interviews or when I'm talking, I have to check myself to tell myself, no, be the real you. You don't have to be that person anymore. And so even though it was, 8 years ago, I still am working to unravel and undo the damage that was done by having to be this completely different person for so long.
Part of the journey, part of the process.
Yeah.
That is ongoing. The last of the baseball theme questions is small ball, and this has been my favorite because it's had the most unique answers. It ended up leading to me writing a book called Small Ball, Big Results, about the little things that add up to the big things, the big wins, the big home runs, the touchdowns, whatever we want to call them. So what is small ball to you in your world?
So small ball to me is language. And so people feel as though the language we use is not that significant. People find it inconvenient to change their language. But language in the diversity, equity, and inclusion world is paramount, and it leads to progress. So an example of that is, using people's correct pronouns, where 5 years ago, if we asked people to do that, they would have rolled their eyes and say, I'm not calling you her, you're he, but respecting pronouns. Little things in the locker room, like not saying, all right, men, let's go, right? We're not only talking to the players, we're talking to the staff and saying, all right, everyone, let's go. when you're speaking to players and you don't say, talk about their girlfriends and their wives, but talk about player spouses or significant others. Coach Sean McDermott had a press conference, I think it was last season, and he, very eloquently just stated, to the men and women who are coaching my players, and then he went on, and it was subtle, but you should have seen the reaction and the texts I received just by Coach McDermott, including women in his, in coaching. So if everyone could, pay attention to it and look to progress it, and I do every day, I look to progress my language every day, it means a lot to marginalized folks. And it certainly is a small thing that leads to people feeling like they're included, which then allows them to bring their full self to work, which then optimizes their output for you. And so I really believe that language snowballs into much bigger progress.
I think that's one of the best small ball answers that I've heard, because it fits. No, I mean, because it's something that applies to all of us.
Right.
I mean, it's something, one of the things that I love about that question, or the answers at least, is that they usually are something that we all can learn from to make our lives better, or our teams better, our employees better. And so that's something that we all could wake up and start becoming habit. And it's the, the little things turn into the big things that when they become habit. And so small ball, to me, when you start practicing it, when you start playing small ball with intent, not just by accident, but with intent, it becomes much more powerful. And so, and that's the reaction that you got from that press conference. Okay, we're going to wrap it up with 4 final questions as we round the bases. You don't know what these are, but they'll be fun. The first one is, I want a scouting report in her prime of Sam Rapoport, the quarterback.
Joel, I have never been asked that in my 20 years.
All right, see,
in the NFL. That's a great question. The scouting report. All right, I'm going to give you. The first the positives, and then what she needed to work on. So, positives were speed, leadership, and ability to rally players to succeed. I believe I was a motivational leader, and I was able to read the defense very well. And I was a bootleg quarterback, so I was able to throw on the run, and really those were my strengths. Now, we don't have time for my weaknesses because I'm a 5'5" quarterback, but I wasn't a great pocket passer. My footwork wasn't great. I needed to work on my arm strength, and I needed to work on my cadence was always not loud enough, my coach said. So I don't have a loud voice. I've never been able to project my voice. So those are all the needs for improvement on my scouting report.
All right, so here's what I've come to understand. My side of the family, whether that be the Goldberg side of the family or my grandfather's side of the family, so that would be my maternal grandfather. That's where I got the voice from, I guess, the ability to project a voice. Because I didn't get the athletic genes at all, which I think came from your side of the family. Because I believe was it either your grandfather or his oldest brother? One of the two of them. I think it was your grandfather might have played semi-pro hockey. Is that right?
He did. Yeah, my grandfather played semi-pro hockey, and my father played semi-pro football, and baseball as well. So I think I got it from that side. But I'd love to trade spaces for a day, Joel, and have your voice, because it's always a challenge that I cannot project my voice, and I don't know why, but.
Well, let me know when you want to do that so I can go and get out on the field or the ice or the court or something and actually act like an athlete, because I only talk to him every single day. We can trade off of that. No, I remember that your grandfather, my great uncle Leo, I always remember hearing that he was a great hockey player. I didn't realize that your dad, and I think I knew about your dad with football. I don't think I knew about your dad with baseball. So very, very interesting as well. Okay, the second question, and sometimes I like to ask this when I have a big name guest on, and then they have an equally famous spouse. And sometimes I'll be a little bit mean and say, who's the smarter or this or the that. And I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say that, very publicly, there have been so many articles about you, about your wife, and the two of you, like the two of you are conquering the world in the most amazing ways. I want you to brag about your wife, because she certainly gets a lot of spotlight in a different way as well.
Oh man, I love this question. And you definitely don't have enough time for this, because I think the world of her, but my wife is a film producer. She has 2 Emmys. She's been nominated 11 times, and her intent through film is to change the world. And she's done that time and time again by telling, the first story about a transgender athlete on the big screen. She was the one who produced the film about Michael Sam when he was coming out. She's produced numerous films and directed numerous films about, women's empowerment in sport. And that really is her bread and butter. But she is dedicated to the marginalized and to telling stories in a unique and different way that can't necessarily be told by the prototype producer director that we see all the time, which is, the straight cis white man who is great and tells amazing stories. But sometimes you need a different lens to tell the stories authentically. So she is an absolute rock star. I plan to ride her coattail into retirement. I tell her that all the time. She is the star of the family. But it's fun and inspiring to be married to her for that reason.
What does your son think about the two of you and all of your amazing jobs and endeavors, or is he still too young to fully grasp what you two do?
He's too young, but he's going to be 3 next month. But I think he understands. And what we're trying to show him is, we're 2 working moms, and we want to demonstrate to him that that's important to us and that we care about, our needs, and we also care about his needs. And so that's something that's just important to both of us, for him to see us working, for us to see us in action. And the couple of times that he has seen us in action, you can kind of see his eyes change a little, and he gets a little pride. He's not really sure what's going on, but I saw his chest pump out a little bit a few times, and that's always rewarding as a parent to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. I miss those days. I remember those very, very well. Okay, third question as we round the bases. When I was sitting at home during the pandemic, out of work for baseball, and I actually turned this podcast into a daily thing. I've gone back down to 2 a week, and so I really just started telling people stories. One of the guests I had on was a woman here in town named Kathy Nelson, who's become a good friend of mine, but she's the president, CEO of the Kansas City Sports Commission. And so she was talking about, and she had this, just this difficult moment of having to cancel the Big 12 basketball tournament here in Kansas City, millions of dollars of revenue, top-notch college athletes with tears streaming down their face because they're going to have to hop back on the bus to go back, home to campus and all of that. And she said she kind of channeled, I'm paraphrasing it all here. She channeled the words of Billie Jean King, "Pressure is a privilege." And when she said that, and I've never met Billie Jean King, I know that you have, but when she said that, it changed my whole perspective. I was out of work, I was under pressure like most people in this country, and it made me embrace the moment. It made me, now whenever I'm facing something with an uphill battle, I think about that, what an opportunity, instead of sort of the negative voices that we have. And so what I wanted to ask you was what it meant to meet a Billie Jean King. I don't know if she's the coolest or the biggest name or the most important that you've met, and what you took away from her.
She is. I met her a couple times, and the last time I was fortunate enough to hang out with her on the sideline of a Falcons-Buccaneers game in Atlanta. And so we had a lot of time with each other. And, one thing she said to me that has always stuck with me is, because I spoke to her about adversity, and I spoke to her about the negative side and the hills we have to climb. And she was actually done for the day, and she walked away. And then she came back to me and she said, "Don't forget that you're in the ring with the boxing gloves and they are not." And she's like, "Don't ever forget that you are in that ring." And then she gave me the biggest compliment I've ever heard from anyone, but certainly from her, it meant the world, where she's like, "And also don't forget that you have it." And she's like, "Don't lose that it and use that it." And she walked away. And I remember being like, I think I can retire now, that, like hearing it from her. We are all standing on her shoulders. She is the woman, she is the person that we all look up to and has changed this country and world in ways that we'll never, be able to measure. And so those two anecdotes that she gave me will stick with me forever. And, she's the number one person I look up to in the sports industry.
If Billie Jean King believes in you, what more do you need, really?
Nothing,
right?
Nothing.
Beyond the cool factor of how cool, there's that too, right? Oh my God, Billie Jean. But then when you start to actually think about, this is the pioneer, this is the woman, and she's in many ways handing that baton to me and others, not just you, Sam, that has to be so powerful. It feels powerful to me to be able to hear that. I think that I would have chills just shaking Billie Jean King's hand, or anyone of that magnitude. And there are only a handful of them in our lifetime, whether it be in and out of sports. So to have that personal endorsement has to be just the most I don't know. I mean, the most reassuring and powerful thing ever.
It really was. She's it, right? I felt like I knew I was in the presence of greatness. And, someone else whom I look up to very much in the sports industry, Donna Ponte, who is our chief football admin officer at the NFL. And she's been the highest ranking woman in football for decades. And she, the advice she gave me once that is my favorite advice, and what I keep in my head at all times is adversity is an opportunity. Adversity is the opportunity. And so whenever you're faced with something, last season was a great example. How the hell are we going to put on a football season this year, right? Mm-hmm. That's the opportunity to step up and say, I will figure it the hell out. And I keep that advice from her in my mind all the time. And it's in line with what Billie Jean King said as well, which is you can go two ways in adversity. You can say, like, this is impossible and I'm not going to do this and this is going to be too hard, or you can take it head on. And I try as much as I can to take it head on.
Yeah, that validates everything that I've been saying and so I speak to corporations, companies, and associations like you do all the time. And I use that Billie Jean King quote from the Kathy Nelson interview. And I say, I've suddenly realized that when you're under pressure, you have an opportunity. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing essentially that you're learning there. Okay, final question, the walk-off question. It's a little bit of a two-parter, sort of a before and an after. What were your dreams, your true dreams in your head growing up? And now what would you say to all of those girls, boys, everyone out there that could be the next Sam Rapoport or whatever they want to be?
My true dream growing up was, I knew football was incredibly popular in Canada and Mexico, and I knew that girls and women weren't playing football in the United States, and I thought that was crazy. And so my true dream growing up was to change that. And through the NFL, I've had the opportunity through not only the Women's Careers in Football Forum, but I also created a program to get 30,000 girls involved in flag football throughout the country. And so, I was afforded that opportunity. I kind of got my dream job at the NFL in many different ways. And, for younger kids that want to do that, I would say, I got a lot of advice growing up that, the NFL's great, but it's hard to get there. Maybe you should look at one of their sponsors. Maybe you should look at college football. Maybe you should look at the CFL. And I didn't want that. And so I heard the advice, but that's not what I wanted. And so I would kind of advise people to say, don't settle for what you don't want. Be tenacious, be aggressive, be assertive with what you want, and go for specifically that, because we're not the smartest people in the world, right? Like I'm certainly not doing brain surgery or flying rockets into space, right? Like anyone could do my job. You just need to have the attitude that, like, I will get this done. And so I think that's kind of what I would impart back is don't settle for good enough. Go for what you want, because you get one life and this is it. And you spend a great deal of time of it working. So you might as well work in something that you're passionate about and what you were put on the planet to do.
Well, pretty amazing that you have found that and it's all part of the journey. It really is. I mean, we all want to get there from day one. You never get there day one. You're still going there. Yeah. I'm still going there, and that's the beauty of the journey. And so this has been amazing. Sam Rapoport, Senior Director, Diversity and Inclusion at the NFL, who also happens to be my cousin, and I have just followed your career from a distance. I think a bunch of years back, I was in New York and and we went out or something like that. It's been a lot of years, and I still haven't met your wife. I hope I could do that at some point, and your son. But I know, because I see some of the, email chains that occasionally can go back from, our mom's generations and those cousins. And when you're in an article, something usually gets sent around and they're bragging and all of that. So I know that the family is proud. And I know that men, women, boys, girls all around the country, around North America, and even around the world are inspired and proud of what you're doing too. So I'm glad that you were able to make some time. I know football season is starting soon. I know that because it's really hot out here in Kansas City, which means 2 days are around the corner. But Sam, I'm proud of everything that you're doing and that you'll continue to do. Thanks for spending time on Rounding the Bases, and keep up everything.
Thank you so much, Joel. It was a pleasure.